Today we introduce you to Mark Rodriguez. Mark is a stonemason, a father, a husband, and a double lung transplant recipient 2 times over. His life has been a collage of extreme ups and downs. Mark's story covers several dimensions. It is a story of life challenges, faith, and challenges to that faith. To some degree, a fall from faith and redemption. This interview takes us through the window of his childhood, becoming a stonemason, suffering lung disease, losing just about everything he had, and then bouncing back, only to suffer from lung failure again. Eli and Mark talk about his heart stopping on the operating table and what that experience was like and what he saw. The story continues with his second recovery, then another financial ruin that led him into the dark world of selling and using drugs, eventually pulling himself back up into a happy, healthy life with restored faith in a second marriage. As you hear what Mark has been through, we hope that you will find inspiration to live your best life, regardless of the hardships that may come at you. If you're going through medical hardships yourself, Mark's story just might be the inspiration you need to continue fighting your own battles. Whether you watch this in several shorter sittings, or all at one time, we hope you enjoy Eli's conversation with Mark Rodriguez. For your convenience, there are some bookmarked key spots listed in the description below. Thanks for watching this first episode of Who is Santa Fe?
Mark, it's been a pleasure to get to know you over the last few weeks. You have an incredible story of a life of severe ups and downs, and it's fascinating. So I'd like to just take some time today to just kind of pull that out of you and just tell your story. So let's start back. Just to give some context, you were born and raised in Santa Fe?
Yes.
Okay. And you graduated Santa Fe High School back in 1987?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And you actually played some college basketball here in New Mexico and in California?
Yes, when I graduated high school, I went to junior college in California, and then I returned to New Mexico to play out my final years at New Mexico Highlands University.
Okay. After that, you actually had a little bit of a stint as an actor in the film business. You had a minor part in Kickboxer 4, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How was that?
It was interesting. I never really even planned on doing that. I just rode my bike down to the plaza one day, and this woman walked up to me and asked me if I was an actor. I said no. She asked me if I was a model, and I said no. And then she asked me if I wanted to be one, and my response was, I guess I don't really have anything else going on right now. So that's where it began, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
For a couple years.
Yeah, that's cool, man. That's very cool. Your main profession on and off through the years, though mainly on, has been stonemasonry. Right?
Yes.
How did that start?
Well, I was fresh out of high school. I just graduated. My brother and another gentleman named Joe Gentry came by my mom and dad's house to fill up their water canteen. And they asked me what I was doing. So I told them I'm about to go look for a job. And Joe said, well, you just found one. Come with us. And I said, well, what are you guys doing? And he says, we're making walkways out of flat stone. And I thought they were lying. I'd never seen flat stone.
You can't make walkways out of flat stone.
I'd never seen it, so I didn't believe them. The only reason I went is because I thought they were lying to me.
Yeah.
And trying to pull a fast one on me or something.
Yeah.
When I got there, they were not lying. And from the very beginning, I was hooked. And it's never stopped.
Yeah. Yeah. You just love stonemasonry. I know you're very, very good at it. So I think you started, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you started being a stonemason in what, 1995?
Full time, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was around the time I found out I was going to be a father.
Huh?
That's when I decided that the irregularities of the movie business were not conducive to raising a young daughter. And so that's when I decided to take on stonework full time and make it a career.
Okay. And so you worked in stonemasonry for quite a few years before you had any real health problems, right?
Yeah, a couple decades at least, and then in 2010 is when it all
Started going downhill.
came to a screeching halt.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but stonemasonry is hard on the lungs because you're breathing dust from stones that you're cutting, correct?
Yes, it's even harder when you have Superman disease and you think you're invincible.
Well,
And back in those days, there wasn't a lot of safety measures being carried out. Actually, if you even put on a bandana or some type of protection, the older guys would, go in on you pretty hard and tell you to basically get lost if you couldn't handle it.
so if you would put on a mask or something, you were looked at as, silly and you can't cut it.
Yeah, even a bandana.
Yeah.
And they would straight up say, like, get out of here if you can't handle it.
Yeah.
And so that was just the attitude. But at that time, I don't think a lot of people really knew the dangers of silicosis fibrosis until we started seeing some guys that we knew dying of it. And
So, I'm sorry, go ahead, I cut you off.
and by the time I started taking the precautions, it was already too late.
Okay. All right.
So
So, what were the first symptoms that you started noticing in 2010, right?
yeah, it was,
How did that look?
in September of 2010, I started coughing a lot. And I thought it was strange because it wasn't really the time for cold and flu season. And then it was kind of a different sounding cough. And then as the month progressed, I started getting like dizzy spells. I'd be on one knee cutting a stone, and then I'd stand up and I'd get real dizzy. And stonework job sites are not really conducive to dizzy spells. And then others started noticing that I was dropping weight and I was breathing differently. And then on October 14th, I was doing a fireplace in White Rock on a Friday. October 14th, I woke up in the morning and I felt horrible. So I decided to go into the ER. And I thought at most I had the flu or pneumonia. But I was there for 30 minutes and they were already admitting me to the hospital. once they took my vitals, they saw that something was really wrong. My oxygen was at like 66. And so they ordered an x-ray right away. And once they saw the x-ray, then they admitted me immediately. My lungs were, my right lung, the bigger lung, was gone. It wasn't even operating. The smaller lung, 8%, little piece on the top, that was all that was operating.
So you were barely breathing.
Yeah, I mean, I look back at it now and I really don't understand how I was able to work like that on 8% lung function.
I know. Yeah, that seems amazing right there.
And they let me out of the hospital after 8 days, and I was on oxygen 24/7. And then I was just trying to figure out how to deal with this massive dose of life interrupted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was that here in Santa Fe that you were diagnosed?
Yeah.
Okay. What did the road look like to your first lung transplant? What kind of a wait was that? What did that look like in your life?
Well, in the beginning, once I got home, I went into a deep depression. I didn't leave the bed for like 5 days. I didn't eat. I just laid in there and cried, really. But that point from October to January was really rough. There was a lot of days where I wasn't sure I wanted to make it.
So you went through a 3-month pretty severe depression.
Yeah, and then on January 17th, I got notified that I was going to start a pulmonary rehab program at the local hospital, at their cardiopulmonary rehab gym. And I'll never forget this, January 17th of 2011. I drove up to St. Vincent's. I parked. I got out of my truck. Walking in with my oxygen. It took me 15 minutes to get in there. And I got in there and they did, the intake and everything. And
let me just interrupt you for 1 second. How old were you at this point?
I was 41.
Okay, so 41-year-old man, and you're taking 15 minutes to walk from your truck in the parking lot inside the hospital.
In a handicapped spot.
Man.
No less. Well, my total workout lasted 12 minutes. I did 4 machines, 3 minutes apiece. And I was spent. And they took my vitals, and then I made my way back to my truck. It took more than 15 minutes to get back there. And when I got into my truck, I remember I just broke down. But that day I made a promise to myself and also to God that I wouldn't quit. And I said these very words, God, I don't know how long I can do this, but I'm not going to quit. I promise you I'm not going to quit. And in this house, you were never taught how to quit. I recall not wanting to play baseball one year. And I told my dad, I don't want to play anymore, Dad. I'm going to quit the team. And he said, no, you're not. You made a commitment. You're going to see it through. If you don't want to play next year, then don't join. But you made the commitment. You're going to see it through. Because you're part of a team, and it's not fair to these other guys who made the commitment. You put them in a position.
That's a really valuable lesson. I'd like to take a quick rabbit trail right there, because you're talking about prayer. You're talking about making a promise to God. Your family was Catholic, correct?
Yes, we were raised Catholic.
Okay, so you were raised Catholic. You were raised in the church. So talk to me a little bit about your faith at that point in your life, because going through hardship and what you believe as far as your faith goes are like that. So what was your faith structure? What did that look like in your life at that point?
Well, with that point when I got sick, I really wasn't attending church much. And to be perfectly honest, I wasn't talking to God all that much either. Mm-hmm. I had one of those moments where you have your come to Jesus meeting. And I've had a couple of those, maybe about 3 of them in my life, where it was, it could have gone either way. And I decided to do that, and I just went all in. And if I had not made that decision, I probably would not be sitting here with you today.
So you eventually landed up fortunate enough to get a double lung transplant. How did that look? How much further after that 3 months of that dark place and stuff? How much further along was it before you were actually, in process of or in line for that procedure?
I was so bad that they had to continue the order because I used up all my visits, but they made an exception because I was dying, so they wanted to make sure that I kept going in. I went for an evaluation at the beginning of May to a hospital in Colorado, and they agreed that they were going to list me, but it had to go through a committee. There was a committee meeting, and the committee had to approve it. And so they said, "This looks like it's going to happen. We'll be calling you here in the next week or 2." Well, that call didn't come. 2 weeks went by, the call didn't come. 3 weeks went by, it didn't come. A month went by, it didn't come. So a little bit after that, I called them, said, "Well, what's going on? I haven't heard from you guys." And so they explained to me that they had some concerns that I may have cancer, that I was showing some signs of lymphoma. And so they started ordering a whole battery of cancer tests. So for that whole summer, I was going through some very scary tests. I just got this mindset a little bit in that if I was going to die, I was going to die fighting. And if I died at the rehab gym, so be it. At least everyone would know that I was fighting. And so I would go hard on those workouts. And I was preparing myself for the fight of my life. And something just happened like halfway in to this first year, where it kind of just it was like a switch. And I was no longer depressed. I was no longer scared. I was just ready to fight. And that's where a lot of my warrior spirit started coming out of me. We all have a warrior within us. It just takes different things to bring it out. Well, it took me going to the edge of my death, or the edge of my life, crossing over to find that within myself. And I've just taken on that, and I've never forgot what it takes to continue a life that has as many challenges as mine has had.
Yeah. It almost seems like you accomplished a lot in that time, from being diagnosed to your first transplant, because you went through depression, you went through all these things, and you kind of came out of that unafraid, determined, ready to face whatever you had to face. So you eventually land up in a hospital in Colorado, where you did receive the first double lung transplant. Tell tell me about that experience, like going into the hospital. I mean, from what I remember talking to you about this before, one of the things you said was you actually looked up and watched the procedure of a double lung transplant before you got one so that you could know what you were about to go through, which is crazy to me because a lot of people don't want to see what the doctors are going to do to you, but you did.
Well, not knowing was tearing me apart. And I had to see it. That's just the way I am.
Okay.
I had to see it for myself. If I was going to go through it, I had to know what I was going through. And so I pulled one up online. I watched the 11 and a half hour surgery performed in UCLA Medical Center. And people thought I was crazy for doing it, just like yourself. But
I mean, I don't know. Maybe
at
I
that
would do
point,
the same thing.
At that point, it empowered me in a way. And I said, if you're strong enough to watch this, the whole thing, what's stopping you from being able to go through it? And so that had a big effect on me. And I really didn't do that until after I had got listed. I got the call on August 6th that I was going to be listed. And it was one of the happiest days of my life. Because up to then, I was fighting hard, but I really didn't see too much light at the end of the tunnel. And then when this call came, I said, okay, you have a chance. And that's all you can ask for is a chance, right? And then 2 days later, they called me and they told me, you're at the top of the list. Pack a bag, get it by the door, and be ready. This could happen anytime. Well, 2 months and 1 day later, I'm at the gym and I had the worst workout. It was the worst day pretty much of my whole experience at the gym. I wasn't feeling it. I had no energy and I had no desire to do the work. And I went home that day, I remember, and I just sat on the couch and I just let it go. I mean, I cried. I'm pretty sure the people that were a couple streets down heard me. And then I just passed out. I woke up the next morning and the first thing I thought in my head was, don't let it be 2 in a row. And so I got up determined to go in there with high energy. And this was October 10th. And I went in there determined to really make up for the day before. And I was getting in a good groove. I had a good sweat going and I was feeling great. Probably the best I had ever felt. And then I was taking a little break and I drank some water and I looked, I had my phone because I had to keep my phone on me at all times. And I pulled it out for some reason. And right when I pulled it out and looked at it, it buzzed. And it said unknown. So I answered it and it was the Transplant Center. And they said, hi Mark, where are you at? And I said, I'm at the gym working out. Okay, well, I need you to listen to me. And she proceeded to tell me, we have lungs for you. We need you to get to the Santa Fe airport in a half hour. And then I got real quiet. And then she was talking and then she said, are you listening? And I said, yes, I am. I just can't talk. Like, I'm speechless. And so she's giving me this whole list. Don't speed, don't run yellow lights, don't talk on the phone, don't call anybody while you're driving. And, she went down this whole list. And so I hung up the phone and I guess I must have been sitting there with this look on my face. And one of the other employees at the gym, a fellow named Ed, he said, Mark, are you all right? And I looked at him and I said, Ed, I just got the call. And he says, what call? What are you talking about, man? I said, the call, Ed. And then he realized what I was talking about. And he says, let's get you to the table. Let's get your vitals. Let me get Mary Allen. Mary Allen Kay was my respiratory therapist. And she did everything she could to keep me alive for that year. Her,
Wow.
along with my pulmonologist, Dr. Lee, they were reaching down deep into their bag of tricks to keep me going. And all of a sudden, Mary Allen comes out of the office and she's screaming and she's putting her hands to her head. And she, oh my God. And so she comes, she does my vitals, and then she says, get a wheelchair. And I said, no, I'm good, I can walk. And she looked at me and with these eyes and she says, you're going in a wheelchair, we're not taking chances. Well, they finally got me out of the hospital. I was on my way home, got my bag, finally got to the airport. And my mom and dad were there, my daughter was there, some other family members, and everyone was crying. And in that moment, I just asked God, what do I do? And I was show strength. So I just gathered everybody up and in a circle, and we joined hands, and I started praying, mostly for them, and also for this person that I did not know that was saving my life, and also for this person's family who was about to go through probably the hardest time they've ever been through as a family. And
You're talking about the donor.
Yes.
Yeah, because the fact that you were getting lungs meant that somebody just died.
Yeah.
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 And you were aware of that going into that.
Well, I was aware of that from the get-go.
And you were praying for the family of whoever this donor was before you even went into the surgery.
Yeah.
Wow.
I would pray for them even before the day that I went to the airport, before I found out I was going to get a transplant.
And it's interesting that later on you were able to meet them and actually get close to them, but we'll get to that later. So go ahead and continue. So going back into the surgery.
So we flew to Denver, and we were in a Learjet. We got there in a half hour. It was the smoothest ride I ever had on a plane. And then we got in the ambulance, and they went to the hospital, and there was some time where they were checking my vitals and getting me comfortable, and then finally they moved me to the operating waiting room. And so we were sitting there, we were just talking a little bit, and I was kind of just resting. And then I noticed everybody started moving around really fast. And I told my mom, I said, I think this is gonna happen soon, Mom. And she says, how do you know, Hito? And I said, look how everyone's moving. They weren't moving like that before. And right after I said that, this doctor comes around the curtain and he says, are you ready? It's time to go. And, I said my goodbyes, and he wheeled me, and I remember going down this long hallway, and they had already given me something. So when we got in this hallway, it was a long hallway, but towards the end, it like narrowed. That was the last thing I remembered. And then a day and a half after the surgery, I woke up. And I was supposed to be in a coma for at least a week. And when I woke up, everybody, they were super freaked out because I wasn't supposed to be awake.
Wow.
And
were you in pain?
No, I wasn't in pain. I was on plenty of pain medication. But they came in and they decided that I was breathing well enough on my own, so they removed the ventilator. And a little while after that, the surgeon came in. And he came in real quiet, and he was kind of poking his head in real quiet. And then he saw me awake, and I was changing the TV. And he's like, what's going on in here? Just shocked that I was even awake, and said, I don't know, Doc, I'm sorry, I was just looking for a game.
You don't like that channel?
And so he storms out of the room, and you could just hear him reading the riot act to everybody. That why wasn't I notified and this and that. So
ripping the staff.
And so he's checking me, and everything was good. Well, that's when he told me that I was very fortunate that the transplant happened when it did, because I wouldn't have lasted more than 2 more days. And then he said, you were at the end of your rope, my friend. And I said, oh yeah, Doc, just kind of messing around a little bit. Oh yeah, Doc, how many hands did I have on it? 1 or 2? And he says, I didn't say you had any hands on the rope. You were hanging on by a thread. And that's when it hit me, and I stopped being in the joking mood, and I realized how close I really came. Well, I walked out of the hospital in 8 days without oxygen. And for the most part, the recovery went real well. Had to live in Denver for 4 months after. And there was really no hiccups at all.
Yeah, there wasn't any hiccups with the procedure, but you did go through another hard period of time after the first transplant.
Well, there were no hiccups in the surgery, but the surgery was not a normal one either. When they tried to remove my lungs, they wouldn't move. So the doctor did a technique called filleting, but the scalpel wouldn't even penetrate my lungs. A surgical scalpel would not penetrate my lungs. They were solid rock. So his only option was to get the surgical hammer and chisel and bust them out piece by piece.
Whoa.
Which is ironic, because those are 2 of the tools that I made a lot of money of in my career. And because they had to do that, I lost a lot of blood. I actually had to receive 8 units of blood. Your body only holds 11. So not only did I get a double lung transplant, but I got transfusion as well.
And so here you were using a hammer and a chisel for years and years of your life that got you into that situation.
Yeah.
And kind of ironically, the doctor is using a hammer and chisel to remove your lungs to save your life.
You know, I got out of there, and then I started rehab, and I started rehab there in Colorado in their rehab, their pulmonary rehab gym, and it went great. I mean, they even asked me to start working with patients and mentoring patients and pre-transplant people, and even some that were post-transplant. And then they even adopted this workout that I had developed as mandatory for all the other patients. And they even asked me if I could lead the other patients through this workout. So it all went really well. And then 4 months later, I was able to come home.
What did it look like when you came home? Were you able to work?
No. The recovery was still a long ways away from being over. So there was still a lot of uphill, a lot of uphill to go. So it was rough. It was hard, but it was not as hard as it was before. But then had some other things kind of settle in, you know. I started getting a little too paranoid about germs and people, and then I got this really bad bout with survivor's guilt. And so those were some things that I was dealing with that I really wasn't expecting.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of survivor's guilt, you know, your life continuing at the expense of another's ending. Talk to me about meeting the family of your donor and talking to them and even eventually visiting them. Because that's interesting. You know, a lot of people, from what I understand, that have transplants or something like that, I mean, a lot of them don't really go there, but you did.
Well, it was a little bit before Christmas time, and I was just thinking about all the things I had to be grateful for. And the thing that stood out in my mind was the gift of life that I had received. I had not received a bigger gift in my life. And so I felt at that time it was appropriate that I would sit down and write a thank you letter to my donor family. And so I did that. And I didn't get a response until, I believe it was March. They wrote a letter back. And then they also requested that they wanted to meet me. And so the donor family is the one that has to initiate that. And once they do that, then you can go back to the donor network and request a release of information forms, and you both sign them, send them back. And then eventually they send you the other's phone number and an address or whatever. And so I remember it was early May, and I went to my mailbox on a Friday afternoon, and I saw a letter from New York. And I knew right away it was from them. And I didn't even know where my donor was from. She was living in Colorado and she died. Her work had her out there, but she was raised in Beacon, New York. And so I opened this letter and I read it. And I just knew I had to meet these people. And so we traded information, and then when I finally got their information, I called them. And it was a Friday night, and they didn't answer. And then I thought to myself, this isn't really something you leave on a voicemail. So I just hung up. And then the next morning I woke up and I was just chomping at the bit to call them. And then finally at 10 o'clock, I mustered up the courage to do it, and I called again. And they answered on the first ring. And I said, hello, my name is Mark Rodriguez, and I'm the man that received your daughter's lungs. And they said, we know who you are. And we just started talking, and then I happened to say something about Facebook. And my donor dad, John, said, well, Michelle was on Facebook. Do you want to go to her page? And I said, sure, I would love to. So I'm on the cell phone and on the laptop, and then her page comes up. And I just gasped, like I saw a picture of this woman that I had seen in ICU. Several times.
When you were waiting for your transplant?
No. After I'd already got it.
Okay.
And it was right before I would fall asleep. And then I would see this tall blonde woman, beautiful blonde woman with long hair, wearing a long white dress. And she'd be walking away, and then she'd stop, and she'd turn around, and then she'd smile, and then some tears would come down the corners of her eyes, and she'd turn around and proceed to walk away.
Was this a vision you were having or a dream you were having?
I like I said, it was that moment, like right before you fall asleep. Mm. And I really just think that it was her revealing herself to me, but also showing me that she was okay somehow. And then John heard me gasp, and he said, are you all right? And I just blurted it out. I didn't even know I was speaking aloud. And I said, I've seen her before. And he says, you have? I know she went to Santa Fe with a friend for a weekend trip. Did you see her there? And I said, no, I saw her in ICU. And then I realized that sounds that's probably pretty hard for him to hear. And he got real quiet, and I said, I'm sorry, John. I didn't even know I was speaking out loud, but I've seen her. And ever since then, I just had this really deep connection to her.
And to them, too.
And to them.
Because you landed up going and visiting them for her 1-year mass of her death.
Yeah, for her 1-year mass, I decided I was going to attend the mass.
Mm-hmm.
And so I flew to New York, and I stayed with them in the house. I slept in her old room, in her old bed. And I have, to this day, have never had rest that good. It felt like I was taking a part of her back home or something. And I just was at peace. And I hadn't felt that in a very long time. And we attended the mass. It was on October 10th. And then on October 11th, we celebrated my 1-year anniversary. And I love them so much.
Yeah, when we were talking earlier, you even call him
my donor dad.
Your donor dad.
And my donor mom, Peggy.
And your donor mom.
And my donor sister, Cindy.
And he said something very touching to you about your lungs.
Yeah, I was talking to him about the survivor's guilt that I was experiencing. And so he explained, he said, Mark, I want you to know that the reason you got lungs had nothing to do with how Michelle died. She was a victim of domestic violence.
Is that how she died?
Yeah.
So
she was beaten in the head and left on the middle of a country road in Nebraska at 1 a.m.
Man.
And her 9-year-old son was with her, and when the abuser was pulling her out of the vehicle, she yelled to her son to run and hide. Well, he went and hid in a drainage culvert. And the first headlights he saw coming up the road, he jumped out and he waved the car down. Well, that was when God was working, because it turned out to be a policeman. And he told him what was going on. And he told the young boy, lay down in the back just in case he's out there. I don't want him to see you again. And then he started driving up the road, and then he saw her body in the roadway. Well, they were able to save her, get her to the hospital. She was in a coma. She was badly beaten, but only in her face and in her head.
So her lungs obviously were intact.
Yeah, all her organs and everything.
And she was a donor. So
And so she was progressing, and everybody thought she was going to make it. And so they actually allowed her parents to take her home to Castle Rock, Colorado. And she was doing well. Everyone was like very optimistic about her making it. And on October 9th, she had an aneurysm. Mm-hmm. And there was nothing they could do, because of the trauma she had received to her head was too great. It caused the aneurysm. And then they informed, at the hospital, they informed my donor family that she was a donor. And at first they weren't going to go through with it. And they said, she's been through too much and we just want her to rest. And then they went back and they talked about it. And they realized that these were her wishes. She became a donor on her first license. And so her father said, I'm not going against her wishes. And so then they allowed it to happen. And she saved 6 people from death. Excuse me. As her last act on earth, she gave life to 6 people. And it doesn't get any bigger than that.
Wow.
And so he told me, you didn't get these lungs because she got beat by this coward. You got these lungs because she made a commitment. And she lived her life in such a way that she was able to honor that commitment because her lungs and all of her other organs were still viable. And it put it in perspective for me, and I was able to get off of that survivor's guilt. And I kept calling them Michelle's lungs. And then he said, Mark, if I gave you a leather jacket for Christmas, every time I see you, I'm not going to ask you, how's my leather jacket doing? Are you taking care of my leather jacket? It's a gift. I gave you a gift. It's your jacket. That's why I wouldn't call it my jacket anymore. They're not her lungs anymore. She gave you a gift. They're your lungs. You need to start referring to them as your lungs. And that was a huge breakthrough for me. And he's a very knowledgeable man and just a great family. And they made that journey so much different. And I see that now with my second transplant. I don't know the donor. And I realize how fortunate I was to be able to have and still have a relationship with the Stellas.
While we're on the subject of your donor, you have a pretty interesting story, and I have the advantage that the viewers of this don't, because we've been talking about this so much, and I just want to make sure that we don't forget some things that I think are pretty important. So I'll start by asking you this: up until this point, had you ever had a margarita?
No.
Up until this point, had you ever had an interest in listening to classical music?
None at all.
Tell that story.
So one night I couldn't sleep, and so I was looking for relaxing music, put on Pandora.
And obviously this is post surgery,
yeah.
Post transplant. Okay.
And so somehow I settled on classical music, and I fell asleep and I slept great. And then I started listening to it more, and I actually started enjoying it. And didn't really understand why. And then I went and ran a 5K 7 months and 9 days after my transplant.
You're a beast, dude. So 7 months after a transplant, you're running a 5K. Dude, I probably couldn't run a 5K now. And you're over here within a year of a transplant running a 5K. Side note, but that's very cool. Anyway, continue.
Well, that's not even all of it. I was playing in a basketball league in Santa Fe, a men's basketball league. And I got going one night pretty good. And then I got undercut. And I came down, my head was lower than my feet. And I tried to catch myself, and I snapped my wrist. So that ended the basketball, the return to the basketball court. Well, I had already registered for the Transplant Games of America that were coming up later on that year. And so when I ran this 5K, with a broken wrist in the rain. And I was super tired after. So I just went back to the hotel and I passed out. I ended up sleeping all day, and I woke up at 7:30 at night. I looked at the time and I said, I better go get something to eat because I have to take my pills at 8. And I was still tired. I didn't want to drive, so I just walked across the street to this Mexican restaurant. And for some reason, I guess I do know the reason now, but then I didn't. The waitress walked up and she says, "What can I get you to drink?" And I don't know why I did it, but I said, "Do you have one of those margaritas in the real pretty glass?" And I even did this thing with my hands.
In the real pretty glass.
And she said, yeah, sure, I'll bring one. And she walked away, and I'm like, dude, what's with the hands and what's with the margarita? And I never drank margaritas because when I was younger, anytime I would drink tequila, somebody got beat up. And so I realized that's not for you. Just stay away from it. And I did. Yeah. And so I never had a margarita in my life. And here I am. Do you have? And I'm doing this thing. And well, she brought it and I drank it and I ate the food and I enjoyed it. Well, about 9 months after transplant, my donor family was in Colorado handling some of my donor's affairs with her home and some of her possessions and those kind of things. And they told me they were going to be there. So I switched my clinic visit to the same time that they would be there so I could meet them. I had never met them face to face.
Okay, so this was before you went for the 1 year.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so they said, well, Michelle's friends want to have a dinner party, so meet us at this address. And I was super nervous, man. I was sweating bullets. I was freaking out. And I finally got to the house, and they saw me pull up, and they saw me getting out of the car. Well, John and Peggy walked out of the house, and they met me on the front walkway. And they just walked up to me, and they gave me this huge hug. And then they both just put a hand on my chest and on my back from each side. And they just asked me to breathe. And so I just started breathing as deep as I could and as fully as I could. And then we just all started crying, and it was an amazing experience. And then we ended up going in the house, and I walk in this house, and I didn't know anybody. And I walked in, and I felt like I had been there, like I had known everybody forever. It's really comfortable. And everyone started talking to me and asking questions. And somehow it got onto that I ran a 5K at 7 months and 9 days. And then I told them about the margarita. Mm-hmm. And they went, and I said, oh, I'm sorry, I hope you don't think I'm a bad person because I was drinking.
I'm not an alcoholic. And
I felt like I had to start explaining myself. And then they just busted out laughing. Mm. And I said, well, what's going on? Like, you went from one end to the other like that fast. And they just said, like, one of the women said, Michelle was a margarita connoisseur. She had like 30 different recipes. I didn't even know there was 30 different recipes for a margarita. But that was her thing. And everyone was just like really, really surprised, really freaked out that I just randomly started doing that. So they asked me, is there anything else that you have started doing that you never did before? And so I said, yeah, well, one night I couldn't sleep and I started listening to classical music. And they started cracking up again because she had this whole collection of classical music. And even when she was pregnant, she would put the headphones on her stomach when the baby was getting restless. Mm. And they said, well, is there anything else? And I said, well, there's this one other thing, but I don't know if it has anything to do with anything. But when they give you a transplant, they basically take you apart and then they put you back together. And sometimes maybe they don't put something exactly where it was before. But now when I start laughing really hard, I start snorting. And everyone lost it. They just busted out in laughter. And then when they caught their breath, they told me, somebody would say something funny and she'd start laughing. And the harder she laughed, and she would start snorting exactly like that. And it was a lot of things like that. A lot of connections that I had to her.
That is so fascinating to me. I mean, one of those things you could chalk up to, it's just coincidence or something. But there's like several of these things where before your transplant, you would never even thought to do them, and now after pretty much all at the same time, these things shifted, and they happened to be things that your donor was like, did big on.
And I remember on September 18th of that year, I woke up at 1 a.m. and I was working out of town, and I was staying at a buddy's house that was working for the same company. And I woke up at 1 o'clock, and I had this feeling of terror that I have never felt before in my life. I'm not that guy to scare very easily. I've been through some pretty hairy things, but I was terrified in a way that I had never felt before. And then I was just off that whole day, and I was doing a fireplace, and I remember I was way up on the scaffolding, and I kept feeling like I was going to die that day. And I finally had to get down off the scaffolding because I just kept looking down like I'm going to fall and I'm going to die right here. And then at the end of the day, we went back to my buddy's place, and he had a softball game, and he invited me, and I said, I'm not really feeling it. I'm just going to stay here. Well, when I stayed there, I called John. And I told him...
This is your transplant dad?
Yeah, my donor dad, yeah. And I told him, he says, how you doing, Mark? How you feeling? And I said, I don't know, John, something's up today. I'm not feeling good. I woke up and I was terrified, and then he says, well, you know what today is, right? And he says, today's the day that Michelle got beat 1 year ago. I said, well, what time was that? He said, 1 a.m. And so I told him what I was going through, and he says, well, you know, Mark, organs are all made of cells, and cells hold memory. And when your adrenaline kicks in, what's the first thing you do? You start breathing really hard. And then I thought about it, and I'm like, all right, I understand that. I know why that happened now. And the next year it happened again. But the next year, I wasn't like terrified, but I woke up and it felt like a truck ran over my head. And there was nothing I took that could take it away. And then after 12 hours, it just stopped. And then it happened again the third year. Same exact time. And then on the 10th, I would just get really down. Like you would mourning the loss of a family member, or I would just go into this very sad place for a period of, from the middle of September to the middle of October. I was in a really sad and dark place. And the fourth year is I had already gotten sick again, so I was actually on my deathbed of my 4th anniversary for my first lung transplant.
So is this when your body began to reject the lungs?
Well, I thought it was rejection, but it turned out that I had a pulmonary embolism the size of a nickel that the team in Colorado didn't bother informing me about. They just told me I was in chronic rejection. And
this is the same team that gave you the first procedure?
Transplant, yeah. I knew something was going on. And so I made plans to go get checked out. And when I did, that's when they told me, you have 2 months to live and there's nothing we can do for you.
So they rejected you for a second transplant?
Yeah, they didn't even want to try.
So you had the problem with the blood clot, and that led them to the diagnosis of
well, they never said nothing about a blood clot. They just said you're in chronic rejection.
Okay.
And that's it. There's nothing we could do. And I put that place in my rearview mirror, and I never looked back. And I believed them. I actually was coming home to die. But I was just trying to make it 2 months and 1 day so I could tell them, you were wrong. But at 3 months, I got a call from St. Joe's Hospital in Phoenix, Arizona. And they informed me that they were willing to give me an evaluation. And they asked me when I could be there. Is tomorrow too soon? So we hopped in the car and we drove up there to Phoenix, and I was there the next day. And I wasn't there for 6 hours. And they found the blood clot.
That the other hospital had either missed or just not told you about, one of the two.
Yeah.
So I want to take a break from moving onto that, and I want to focus on the time in between there, because you went through a pretty hard time there. I mean, you told me that there was times where, you could barely even shower by yourself. You had gotten extremely sick, and you went through another really dark period.
That was that period made the first time I was ill look like child's play.
Yeah, you could tell some of our viewers about that, and I don't want to focus on that for no reason, but I want to focus on that a little bit, because there's a lot of people that go through hard times, and sometimes they do feel all alone, and hearing a story of someone who's been through that and came through the other side can be really, really beneficial and refreshing.
Well, because of the blood clot, and like I said, it was the size of a nickel. And that blood clot doesn't have to move in order to kill you. It can kill you right where it's at.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came home to my deathbed. And just going to the restroom, I was basically taking a chance with my life every time I did that.
Because you were just so weak.
I was very weak, and I was on such high amounts of oxygen, but they were barely even able to help me. It was barely even able to help me.
So you went downhill pretty fast.
Very fast.
From what the doctors in Colorado said, when they basically said, sorry, you're a goner, see you later.
At the end of August of 2015, I weighed 190 pounds.
And how tall are you?
About 5'11".
Okay.
By the beginning of October, I was already down to 140. And by the end of October, I was down to 120.
Okay, so
in a matter of
you
months,
lost like 50 pounds.
70
pounds like that. Oh, okay.
I still have a lot of PTSD from that period of time. I still don't take long showers. The showers that I was taking at that time, if they went over a minute, I was flirting with death.
You just couldn't even barely stand.
I couldn't stand. I was on oxygen. I had them all turned up full blast, and my oxygen would tank into the low 60s. My heart rate would go up into the 150s, and it was just a perfect recipe for cardiac arrest every time. I couldn't do anything really by myself, and I'm very thankful to the people that were in my life at that time, because had they not been, I probably would not have made it through that.
So who was in your life at that time?
There was a woman that I was in a relationship with. She just took me into her home basically and was my caregiver.
Wow.
And like I said, I'll be forever grateful for her doing that, because had she not, I don't know that I would have made it. And then I got to Phoenix. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. They had to do the evaluation in inpatient because I was just too weak to be coming back and forth. And at that point they said, yes, we can help you, but one of the stipulations is that you can't go home. They were worried about me returning to Santa Fe at high elevation and the travel back and forth. And so they said, if you go back home, we're not interested in helping you. And so I had to make a decision, and I decided to just stick it out. But, excuse me. And when I got there, the doctor said something to me that put a lot of things in perspective. He said, "Mark, I know you're coming here looking for a miracle, but I have to tell you, the miracle's already happened. You should have died like 2 months and 25 days ago. Nobody survives with the pulmonary embolism of this size, this long." And when he said that, I mean, where do you go with that? And when he said that, I just said, well, he's right. Maybe this is the miracle. And maybe the other one's not going to happen. And so the tunnel got very dark again. And they took some time to list me. It's actually a month to the day I got out of the hospital. They called me and they said, "You're officially listed on January 19th of 2016. You're officially listed." And 4 days later, they called me. And the night that they called me it would have been my last day had I not got that call. It was the worst day out of the whole journey.
You were talking about being so weak, and your mom suggesting that you eat something.
Yeah. So she.
So you were just extremely weak that day.
And that day, I didn't get out of bed the rest of the day. I didn't eat nothing. I didn't drink anything. And then that night, somewhere in between 8 and 8:30, my daughter was sitting on the other side of the bed, and my sister-in-law was sitting next to the bed in a chair. I felt this weird sensation like my body was floating away. And I kind of freaked out, and I grabbed the covers, and I was white knuckling them bad boys. And my daughter noticed, and she says, "Dad, what's the matter?" And I said, "I don't know. I think I tried to make up something because this poor girl had a front row seat to this crazy thing for way too long." And so I just said, "I think the sheets are bunched up underneath me." She says, "Well, let me sit you up. I'll fix them." She sat me up, and there was nothing wrong. She says, "They're fine, Dad." And I said, "I don't know what's wrong. Just lay me down." So she laid me down again. And not even a minute later, it started happening again. And so she said, "Grandma, something's wrong with my dad, and he won't tell me." So my mom walks in. She says, "What's the matter?" And I said, "I just don't feel good, Mom."
But when you say it, or you weren't feeling good, you were feeling like you were floating away.
Yeah, like my body was floating, just slowly floating away.
And so you actually tried to grab onto them.
I was grabbing on the covers because I was trying not to float away. And she says, "Well, you haven't eaten all day. You should eat something." And at this point, I didn't want to eat, but I didn't want it to become a thing with my mom either, where we got into a little argument or something. So I was just agreeing, and then I would try as long as I could, and then stop whenever I couldn't anymore. So I said, "Sure, Mom." So she did what any good mom does. When your kid's sick, you feed them, right? Mm-hmm. You give them love, and then you give them food. And so she brought me the food, and I said my prayers, and I had the bowl here, and I got a spoonful of food, and I was right here, and my phone rang. So I put the spoon back in the bowl, and I looked at it, and it said unknown. And I knew it was the transplant center. So I answered it. They said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I was about to eat." And they're like, "You haven't eaten yet, have you?" I said, "No, I haven't eaten yet." "Have you eaten anything today?" And I said, "No. I ate 2 pieces of fruit this morning, small pieces, and then I couldn't eat no more." They said, "Good. Get to the hospital. We have your lungs."
Wow. So you were literally putting
I was right here.
the food up to your mouth. What would have happened if you had started eating and then got that call?
Probably would have died later on that night.
Because they wouldn't have been able to do the
No.
procedure. They needed your stomach empty.
Yeah, if I would have even taken one bite, they wouldn't have been able to do it. And
What a close call.
that would have been my last day. When I got to the hospital, calm came over me. This feeling of something like I'd never felt before. And I told him, I said, if there's someone else that has a better chance with these lungs, I want you to give them to them, Doc. I've had my extra time and I want someone else to have theirs too. And I said, and I know for a fact that all my other organs are good. I've been checking. And when I say this, I know where I'm saying it. And I said, I want you to take my organs and give them to as many people as you can and give them extra time. Because this thing I'm doing right now, it's not living, Doc. I'm just deteriorating away into nothing. And I'll live more by living through them than I will deteriorating on deathbed. And then at least my life will mean something. And he looked at me with raised eyebrows and he said, I've never heard that. Not in your position. I've never heard anybody in your position say this. But here's the thing, Mark. There's not another match in a 500-mile radius, and we can't go past that. These are yours no matter what. I said, well, let's do this then. So my mom came in and I told her, just start praying, Mom. That's all we can do now. And that's the last thing I remembered. I didn't remember him taking me out of the room. I didn't remember anything else. I woke up like 8-9 days later. It seemed like 5 minutes.
So you actually had to learn how to write again, how to walk again. You had to learn how to speak properly again.
Yeah.
So that surgery took its toll on you.
Yeah, I knew. After I just knew something had happened. But I didn't know what. There were so many things that were different than the first time. I had to learn how to use my hands and my arms again. I had to learn how to feed myself. I remember getting something and I think I was ready to put it in my mouth and I turned the spoon and it all over me. And my legs didn't work at all. I had to learn how to walk again. And I always knew something happened, but I never could put my finger on it. Until 5 months after my transplant, my daughter and I had cooked dinner for her. I was already back home in Santa Fe and I cooked dinner for her. We ate dinner. And when she was done with her dinner, she said, do you mind if I watch the rest of this episode of Grey's Anatomy on my phone? And that was all we had. We didn't have no TV. It was pretty rough then because there wasn't a lot of money for things, and especially cable TV. So we didn't have it. And so she'd watch stuff on her phone. And she asked me if I wanted to watch it with her. And I said, no, I think I'm good with the hospital stuff for a while, but go ahead. And so I started flipping through the paper, but I could hear what was happening on the program. And they were bringing a guy into the ER and they said, we lost the pulse and we don't have nothing. And then you hear the doctor say, give me the crash cart. And so I can hear him say clear, and then the doo-doom. It just, that quickly I was gone from my kitchen table, 5 feet away from my daughter, to hovering over a surgery.
Right, and what you're talking about is the fact that your heart stopped on the operating table.
Yeah, but when I was looking at it, I was confused because the only thing I knew was that it was a transplant, a lung transplant. And I knew that because I recognized these huge spreaders. I mean, they basically open you up. And these huge spreaders, and they open them, and they got these huge circular handles. And I said, that's a lung transplant. And then I could hear them start talking. And one of them says, I'm losing the pulse. It's very faint. I'm losing it. I don't have nothing. And then the only thing I don't remember is this, what the surgeon asked for. Because they don't call it the crash cart in the OR. He called it something else. But one of these days something will trigger that and I'll remember. So they brought it in. It's like a little box and there's a couple wires that come out of it and attached to these prongs. And
talking about the defibrillator.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, I mean, I just, that's the only thing that I don't remember. And he said clear, and he touched the heart with the prongs. And it started beating. And then they started saying, okay, we have him back. He's back. And at that point, I could start hearing my daughter's voice. But it seemed like it was very faint, and it seemed like it was very far away, like if she was far off in a forest and she was yelling out to me. And I could barely hear her. And the way she told me was, she asked me a question and I didn't respond to her. And then she looked over at me and I was just there like stone-faced statue. I wasn't blinking, I wasn't breathing. And she started asking me, Dad, are you all right? Dad, answer me. And I wasn't answering. And so she finally grabbed me. And then at that point, like, I could start hearing the voice coming in like it was supposed to sound, but then at the end it came in real fast, like all of a sudden I could hear it loud like I was supposed to. And then in another instant, I was back at my table and I was not hovering over what turned out to be my surgery. And then I heard her and she says, Dad, answer me or I'm calling 911. And she had her phone. And then I gave her like a signal, like, hold on or something. And I just was crying. And finally caught my breath and I was able to tell her what happened. And she was sitting there like, looking at me like, is he going crazy? Or this is really hard to believe. And then she told me what she saw, what she observed. Well, 3 weeks later, I had a clinic visit. And I went into the clinic visit and then they came in and, hey, how you doing? How's the weather in Santa Fe? And I said, hey, before we start all that, I have a question. And
this is the team of doctors in Arizona.
Yeah. And I said, what happened in the OR? And one of them said, what do you mean what happened? We saved your life. We gave you a double lung transplant. And I looked at him and I said, oh, okay. Why don't you guys just tell me what I already know? How about that, huh? And it went from being a doctor-patient thing to almost what felt like a mob meeting, and I was trying to find out information. so I said, when I said that, one of the doctors just blurted out, your heart stopped on the table.
And they hadn't been honest with you about that yet?
Well, they hadn't told me. And it's not that they were being dishonest, it was so much that they were kind of sitting on that for a little bit.
Right. But you knew.
And I said, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Were you ever going to tell me about this? And they said, well, yeah, eventually we were. And I said, well, did you ever even tell my family about this? And one of the doctors said, come on, Mark. Like, we had to go to your mom and your daughter 4 nights in a row and tell them to go say goodbye to you because you weren't going to be with us in the morning. We were going to put that on them too. And I said, okay, that's fair. I can accept that. But what I can't accept is you guys keeping stuff from me. You know what I went through with those cowards in Colorado, how they quit on me. And I said, I won't do this again. I won't. I won't be looking over my shoulder, wondering if you guys have my back. When things go wrong, are you going to bail out on me too? I'm not going to do that. But what I will do is go for a long hike in the mountains and not take my pills with me and take a long nap. Because I'm not going to live like that. I'm not going to do this again. And they were looking at me like they couldn't even believe what they were hearing. And then I said, and don't keep anything from me. There's literally nothing you can tell me that I haven't already heard. Unless you come to me and you tell me, Mark, you're dying in 2 weeks or 2 minutes. That's about the only thing I haven't heard. I'm a big boy. I can handle it. And then from there on, it really changed the whole relationship.
Yeah, you felt like they were more upfront with you.
Yeah, they weren't afraid to say whatever they had to say.
So what did you see when you were under on the operating table? You know, your heart stopped and you hear stories of people that see things. What did you see?
When I came out of the coma, there was 3 things that just I wanted to tell the world. But I couldn't. I had this ventilator. And I had it in for like 5 days while I was conscious, and it was driving me nuts. I thought I was losing my mind. Well, when they finally took it out, I started, hey, I remembered some things, and they were like, no, it's probably a hallucination. You're on a lot of very heavy drugs. But it didn't feel like an hallucination. And I always kept it in my mind, but the things that I saw, the first thing that I saw was I was in this big place. It was like a big house or big building or something. And there was no walls and there was no ceiling. But there was like different areas. Almost like you could walk into another room. It's hard to imagine because there's no walls, but you could walk into a different area. And when I walk into this different area, I would see somebody and they'd be like, hey, Mark, I want to help you. Come here. And so they'd start coming closer to me, but the closer they would get, they would start changing. The skin at first would turn like a reddish black, and then the eyes would like go yellow and on the outside, red on the inside. And then the voice would start changing, and then the ears, and then eventually horns would pop out, and I would freak out and take off running. Well, in this one instance, they surrounded me. Like I felt cornered in a place with no walls, which I know it sounds crazy, but that's the only way I can explain it. And all of a sudden, I just heard this booming voice. This man's soul belongs to me, be gone. And like, it was just shake. It was like could shake anything, shake everything. And then I just felt this massive hand like get me and kind of scoop me behind, almost like if you were walking down the street and you saw a dog approaching, you would get your small child and put him behind you as protection. Mm-hmm. And that's what it felt like. And then all of a sudden, these things just turned into smoke and blew away. And then the second thing I remembered, I was standing on the edge of this cliff. And I looked down and I didn't have any shoes on. And I didn't have a shirt on. But I had on like these brown pants. And my momentum was going forward. And I was trying to get back on my heels. But I couldn't because this hot wind was like pushing me on my back. And I couldn't hold it anymore. And I was looking down and I could see flames. And there was yellow and red and orange flames. But then there was these blue flames. That anything that dropped in the blue flames burned up really fast. But then there was these silver flames that anything that dropped in those silver flames was gone in an instant. And I couldn't hold it anymore, and I went over. And I was about halfway down. And that same hand, just enormous hand, was like, made me feel like a pebble of sand in it. Scooped me up again, kind of put me behind, and said, do not worry, son, I have you. Your soul belongs to me.
So both the first one and the second one have something in common, and that is you were in trouble in these strange and complex places, and you were protected by something bigger than you.
Way bigger.
So I'm curious to know about the third.
Well, the third one...
Assuming you're done with the second.
That was the second one. Okay. And then the third one, I was in this really huge space, but it was pitch black. I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. But there was this little tiny speck of light way, way off in the distance. And I was just curious about it. It's not like you see on the movies where you say, follow the light and all that. It was not like that at all. I was just curious about this little speck of light in this huge dark place I was in. So I started moving towards the light, but then all of a sudden, my body went up vertical about 25, 30 feet. And then when I reached that point, it turned horizontal. And I'm kind of like freaking out, like, whoa, what's going on? And then I started moving towards the light. And I looked back, and on my back, there was like this box that the skin had grown over. And it had 4 propellers on there, like almost the kind you would see like on a bigger drone. And that's how I was moving. And I got close to the light, and I could see like a bed and people, but that's all I could make out. And so I said, I gotta get closer. So I flew around to the front of the bed, and I looked in the bed, and it was me. And I had the 8 chest tubes coming out of my abdomen. I had lines coming out of both sides of my neck. I had a port coming out right here on my shoulder. I had lines coming out of my arms and my hands. And there was all these bags of antibiotics and medicine hanging. And then there was all the machines, the monitors and everything. It's just like it was in ICU. And then I looked behind me, and it was Jesus. And when a lot of people see Jesus for the first time, they're going to be very surprised, because there's a lot of versions floating around down here that aren't even closely accurate. And to his right, he was holding hands with my dad. And to his left, he was holding hands with my first donor, Michelle. And my dad and Michelle were holding hands with one of my first mentors, one of my best friends, my lung brother, Jaime Munoz. And I'm laying in the bed, and I'm looking up at all of them. Like, it was weird, because I went from watching it to being in it. And then I'm looking up, and I'm looking at all of them, and they're holding hands, and they all look down at me. And then they all did this motion with their head and their eyes, like, they looked at me again, and then they did it again. And to me, that was like them telling me, you're not supposed to be here. You have to go back. And I imagine that's when they shocked me and brought me back. But the thing that I probably won't ever understand was, how did I see myself in ICU when I hadn't even got there yet? I died in the operating room on the table. But when I saw Jesus and my dad and Michelle and Jaime holding hands around my bed, it was in ICU. I hadn't got there yet.
Wow.
And that's when I realized the reason why I remembered those things was because I died and I left. When I died, I was no longer in the coma. I left. And then they brought me back into the coma. So that's why I retained all of that. Because you don't remember. When you're in a coma, you don't remember anything. You don't remember what happened before. You don't remember anything. But that's how I knew something else took place. Because if nothing else took place, I wouldn't remember these things. I wouldn't remember having a front row seat for the battle for my soul.
And so it was based on these experiences that when you had that meeting with the doctors later and you asked them what happened in there, you knew. You knew that your heart stopped. And they said, well, we gave you a double lung transplant. And that's why you said, oh, come on, guys. There's more than that happened. So it was based on this experience that you knew.
I already knew when I was asking them, I already knew the answer.
Because based mainly on that experience.
Yeah, and it was an out-of-body experience 5 months after.
Wow.
And to try to explain it, I don't even try because I just, there's no way.
Yeah. Mark, after your second lung transplant, you went through some real hard times again. Hard to find employment.
Just getting out of the hospital was hard. I was in there for a month. Many days I didn't think I was going to make it out of there. I used to not want to fall asleep because I was afraid I wouldn't wake up. So I would stare underneath the blinds, this little space underneath the blinds all night long. And then when I saw the sun start coming up, I'm like, okay, you're all right. There comes the sun. And I'd be able to doze off for an hour here and there, whatever. But I didn't think I was going to get out of there for a long time. And actually I had to get another surgery about maybe 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks after the transplant. They found that the part where they were connecting into the donor part was smaller than mine, the aortic artery. Mm-hmm. And so when I would get up and walk, my oxygen would just tank. And then they finally figured out why. And then if they would have released me, it would have ended up bursting and I would have bled out in less than a minute. That's actually how Jaime Munoz passed. Mm-hmm. His pulmonary artery burst and he bled out before the ambulance could even get there. And so they had to go back in for another 6-hour surgery. And they had to open me up, my chest again, and redo the connection. So then again, I was back in ICU. I had the ventilator for a little bit longer. And I really thought I wasn't going to make it out, but, God had some different plans. And the recovery was real tough. It was super slow. Like I said, the first one to the second one was day and night.
Well, you say the first one you walked out of the hospital in 8 days.
Yeah.
And now this one is, here you are a month.
The second one, I wasn't even out of the coma in 8 days. And so the recovery was very, very slow. But then eventually I was able to come home and things started getting better, but it was still slow. And then the world keeps spinning, man. The world doesn't really care about who gets sick. It keeps going. It's got to keep going. And the bills were stacking up, and the bank was calling to come and get my Grand Cherokee, and just seemed like everything was coming down on me all at once. And I got mad about it. I got real mad.
Who was that anger aimed at? What was that anger aimed at?
It was misplaced anger. I thought I was mad at God, but I was actually mad at myself.
But in the moment,
I said, why do you still have me here? Just to struggle and suffer more? Like, how much of this do I have to do?
This is what you're saying to God.
Yeah.
Like, why am I going through this? Why this hardship? Why?
Yeah, and I was strong again, and I was healthy, but I couldn't find a job. I couldn't find a job even that they hired teenagers for. Nobody would hire me. And I was mad because I've been a worker my whole life. I started working for money when I was 7 years old in the neighborhood, doing the neighbors' lawns and weeds and trimming trees and stuff. My dad had me working since I was as early as I can remember, as 4 years old, 5 years old. I remember being on Romesa with my dad, getting loads of wood. I've been a worker my whole life, and now I was ready to work again, and I was healthy enough to work again, and nobody wanted me. And I just felt defeated, and I hate to say this about myself, but I felt worthless. I felt like I had no purpose. I was lost. And I just was mad. I started testing fate at every corner. And that was when, when they say things can always get worse, well, that was that moment. And out of desperation and a moment of lack of faith, I made a desperate financial decision because some things happened and I ended up losing my insurance. And I didn't know what to do, and I made a really bad choice. But it was my bad choice. And the only option that I could think of where I would come up with thousands of dollars to buy these medicines to keep me alive, that would bring in money fast enough. And I don't even remember how I came to this decision, but I made the worst decision of my life, and I decided to start selling cocaine.
Wow. Did you use it as well as sell it?
Eventually, yeah. Yeah. And
you've described those as your dark days to me.
I was walking the dark side, putting a lot of footprints on the dark side, and
it's interesting to me. I'm sorry if I interrupted you. It's interesting to me because similarly to your first donor, to your first lung transplant, when you found yourself doing things that were not like you but was like your donor, like the margaritas, like the classical music, even though you've never met your second donor or likely will ever even know anything about your second donor, there were some things that you found shifted in you again.
Yeah, there was one Saturday we were in the house, my girlfriend and I, and we were doing Saturday morning chores, that kind of stuff, and we had the Pandora on the phone, and a song came on, and I proceeded to sing it word for word. And then after it was over, Sandra asked me, "That's a cool song. Who sings it?" And I said, "I don't know. I've never heard it before." And then I kept sweeping, and then I said to myself, "You just sound really insane right now, dude." And we kind of just left it at that. And then there was another time, or a song by Chris Stapleton came on called Death Row. And the same thing happened. And he talks about in the song how no good light comes in there when you're on death row. And I could see that. And I could feel it. And the things he was talking about in the song, like he didn't need a preacher man coming in to absolve him of his sins. He already talked to Jesus. And I could feel the song deeply. And it was eerily similar to the connections I had with my first donor. But the fact that I didn't know my second donor, it just only raised more questions. And like I said, I don't really remember how easily I came to this decision to do something I had never done before.
You're talking about to sell drugs.
And then there was things that I was doing in the course of this that just were happening, just that I didn't really understand either. And you know how somebody would come up to me and I would know what they wanted and I would pull it out and I'd do this little thing with my hands, and it was from one hand to the other, and then I'd shake the person's hand. And then they eventually do the same back and pass me the money, and nobody knew really except the ones that knew. And then this one night somebody was messing with my nephew. He's this big tall black guy, and I knew he was about to start throwing down with my nephew, and then I just intervened, and then I ended up choking this guy out MMA style. And I had never been trained on how to do that. I got him, took him down to the ground, got my legs in, hooked him in, and I just started taking his air out.
You just had at that moment an innate knowledge of, and almost
when he was about to pass out and I felt his body going limp, I let go, and the bouncer pulled him out, and then I stood up, and somebody asked me, like, whoa, where do you train at? And I'm like, I don't train. I've never even learned how to do that. Again, sounding insane, like you just did it. And I'm not in no way trying to say like that's the reason why or anything like that, but I made my own decisions. And when this house of cards fell, I stood on my own 2 feet and held myself accountable for it all. And I faced it like a man, and that's why I'm not ashamed to talk about it, or I'm not ashamed of that part of my life, because I owned it, I made it right, and I learned from it and became better from it. And I turned something very negative into something positive. And that's why I'm not ashamed of it. And I'm actually proud of how I ended up coming out of it, because I could have very easily doubled down and ended up getting in more trouble or getting killed. But when I was on that road to redemption, when almost everybody except for less than a handful of people stuck by my side, it felt like I was not on that road alone. I knew that I was on that road walking it with Jesus, but I just felt like there was a reason why I inevitably would have had to walk that road.
Yeah, you talked earlier about that period of time making the decisions that you did, and you said something to the degree of losing your faith.
Yeah, so, I did. I totally lost it, because I mean, if you're questioning God, you've already lost your faith. Because faith is where you don't question God. It's the exact opposite, right? Mm-hmm. You let God be God, and you don't question what God's doing in your life. And that's faith. And faith strong enough leads to trust. And I didn't have that. I was asking God, why do you have me here like this? But I thought I was mad at God, but I was actually mad at myself, because I wasn't making it happen. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know that until I got on this road to redemption, and I got in my own mirror, and I said, what are you going to do here, Mark? You've blown up your whole life. What are you going to do now?
So that road to redemption, what popped you back onto that? Was there something that nudged you from the decisions you were making back to your road to faith, back to your road to redemption?
When you're laying on that concrete bed,
Jail?
you either harden your heart or you have that come to Jesus talk.
What are we talking about here?
When I was in jail.
Okay. What did you get thrown in jail for?
Well, I was leaving a bar one night, and this drunk guy approaches me. Hey, help me out. I need to drive home, and I need some help, and my buddy needs some help. And I just told him, man, I'm not in the mood to play Santa Claus tonight. I'm going home. And I don't do business out here because everyone knows there's cameras up in that window up there. In the hotel window. So later, I'm out of here. And I started walking away, and he said the wrong words. He pushed the magic button. And I turned around and put him down. Hard. Only to proceed to turn around, and there's a policeman driving up right there. Saw the whole thing. So that was how God decided to end this madness. So when I was laying on the concrete bed in jail, I made a promise. First to God, that I was done, and that I would stay done. And then when I got out, the first person who was waiting for me was Sandra, who eventually became my wife. She wasn't at the time. And the first thing I said to her was, I promise I'm done.
So you made a promise to God.
And then I had her drive me over to my mom's house. And then I told her the same thing. I told her, I'm sorry, I let you down. And I told her why. And she asked me why. And it was more than what a lot of people even asked. They got stuck on the what. So they just went away from my life. And they never bothered to ask the why. They just made up their minds for themselves. Oh, this guy's a piece of you know what. And he got a second chance, third chance. He's just throwing it away. But nobody ever asked why. But she did. So I told her. And I promised her I was done. And I took the first job I could get. And I was on probation for a year. It was my first offense. I got a lawyer. I told him the circumstances. He relayed that to the prosecutor. So it was my first offense. So they both decided that putting me in jail was not a very good idea. That this was not, that the possibility of it being a life sentence was real because there's a lot of germs in jail and there's a lot of things that work against the transplant person in jail.
Right. So being in jail for an average person is bad enough, but being in jail for someone like you who has some real fragility with some of what you had been through.
Yeah, it could quite possibly be a life sentence.
Right.
And so, or death sentence, however you want to look at it. But I knew I had put myself there. And I knew that I had to get myself out. Mm-hmm. And that's where the very lonely road to redemption began. And I was mad at a lot of people because they didn't reach out. And they didn't give me the tough love that I was waiting for. And I got stuck on this thing like, well, if they want to leave me when the storm is on my head, when that sun is shining on me again, just keep the same distance. Don't come back when the sun's shining on me again. Just keep the same distance. And I was stuck on that for a long time until I finally realized, like, none of those people were meant to be on that road with me. So why was I being mad at them for something that they weren't meant to be doing or weren't really come out to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, I had people, brother, I'll do anything for you. I got your back. And then I became invisible to everybody, pretty much, except for, like I said, less than a handful. And it just, it was a rough time. It was a very rough time. But I was getting through it. And one Saturday afternoon, I had a buddy at the house. And we were having some burgers and a beer. And he started asking me about how's things going? How's probation? How's this job you got? And I said, the job is lousy. I'm basically doing the same job I had when I was 7. Pulling weeds, cutting grass. And I just said this statement. I said, if I could just do stonework again, then maybe I might be all right. And he said, well, why don't you try it? Why don't you do it? And I said, I don't know if I can. He said, what? And I said, Rico, I don't know if I can, man. And he got mad at me and he called me out because he said, man, look at you. You're always telling everybody you gotta believe in yourself, even if no one else does, or don't doubt yourself. Thousands of people will doubt you in your life. Don't ever become one of them. He said, is that just a bunch of crap, or do you really even live by that? And I said, I see what you're doing, and you have every right to. You're right. And then about a week later, he died in a motorcycle accident.
Wow.
And I just decided there and then when I found out, when I got that phone call, I just decided that conversation was not going to go, was not going to be in vain. And so I decided to go back to what almost killed me, to find my true self again. And I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. A lot of the things that work for me should come with disclaimers. But it worked for me. And I think about that young man every time I go to work, because had he not called me out, I might still be saying maybe or if, and all those limiting words that we use as humans when we're practicing self-sabotage. And I'm just very grateful that last hot conversation that we had was the most important one we ever had. And it was rough going back, like recovery from my first transplant was somewhere here, second one was here, come back to stonework was right in the middle. First 5 minutes, I smashed this pinky. It felt like I almost chopped it off. I smashed it in between 2 rocks. I moved a rock and I didn't see the other rock, and boom, it just...
Ouch.
And a couple minutes later, go to hit the chisel and I missed the whole thing. Bam, right on my hand. Just a clean shot. And I just started laughing. And I looked up to the sky and I said, I see what you're doing, God. You want to find out if I really want to be here or not, don't you? Or if I'm just giving you alphabet soup. And I refer to alphabet soup as, you look at alphabet soup, it's a bunch of letters thrown together. They don't mean nothing. They have no order. Well, that's what a person's word looks like when they don't back it with action. It's just alphabet soup.
Wow.
And
that's pretty insightful.
And so I think God was just making sure I wasn't giving him alphabet soup.
That you meant it.
And that I was committed. And I think the guys out, the new guys, they thought that, I think the new guy's crazy. He's talking to the sky. And it was very rough. I remember driving home, radio off, window down. So tired that I couldn't even cry, but I was so tired that I couldn't even hold the tears back either. And I remember the wind hitting my cheeks, feeling the tears coming down, and just in silence. And I remember one Friday I was in the shower. I got in the shower after work, and I was so beat up. And I was feeling sorry for myself, and I was just not being a warrior. And I got mad at myself, and I checked myself, and I said, how dare you act like this, you punk? You should be grateful for this pain. You shouldn't even be here to feel it. And then in that moment, I checked myself verbally like that out loud. And then in the next breath, I just said it. And I say it every day now. God, well then God help me turn my pain into power, my heartaches into helpfulness, and my traumas into teachings for someone else. And it's worked. And I go to work every day, and every day I make it to the rock pile is a miracle. I need surgery on my ankle, my knee, my hip, my shoulder, my thumbs. But when I get to the rock pile, I'm good. And although my body has been beaten, broken, battered, my soul is happy. And it's glowing bright with the bright light. And my heart is just smiling. And no, I'm not as strong as I used to be. No, I'm not as fast as I used to be. But I really feel like my work is better. And I just feel super blessed that God gave me the opportunity to return back to my craft and my passion for stonework, and also to regain control of how I put down the hammer and chisel when it's time, as opposed to before when it was just ripped out of my hands. And the doctor told me, you'll never do this again. Well, some stonemasons have really hard heads, and I happen to be one of them. And I would always think to myself, never is a really long time. And when I was on my deathbed, I was experiencing the kind of death that you could hear. Every breath I took felt like my lungs were ripping away from my chest wall, or somebody was walking on a bed of empty water bottles. The sound was maddening. So I had to find a way to distract myself.
What do you see for your future? Where do you see your life going? I mean, you talk about, and you've told a story of all the hardships and ups and downs you've had, and now here you are, happy in your work, doing so much better in your life, married now. When did you get married?
I got married October 10th, 2021.
Tell me about her.
Sandra, she's one of the biggest blessings of my life. She truly is. I'm just grateful that I'm finally able to live this life with somebody who really cares about me, somebody who genuinely lives for me and with me, and I do the same for her. The only thing I wish I could have met her years and years ago, but everything happens on God's time. And she came into my life at the perfect time. She gave me hope. She gave me hope for a future. And when I decided to ask her to marry me, it was one of the most challenging days of my life.
After all you've been through.
Yeah. I didn't even get nervous, man. I didn't even get nervous going into a 12-hour surgery to save my life. Not the first one, not the second one. I'm like, let's go, let's do this. But I remember when I went to ask her to marry me, I tried to be slick, and I had the ring in the little pocket of your pants, you know. Mm-hmm. And I was about to ask her, and I go start taking it out, and it got stuck. And I'm like this, and she's like, what are you doing?
Why are you fumbling with your pocket?
And it was right before Thanksgiving, our Thanksgiving meal. And she goes, what are you doing? And I go, oh, my hip's acting up. It's kind of acting up today. So I pretended like I was rubbing it. Mm-hmm. And so she got a little distracted by that. So she started like serving the food and everything. And then we prayed. And then I finally got the ring out. And I dropped down on one knee. And
where did you do this? Did you do this at home?
No, actually, we and it was during COVID when I asked her. But so what we did was we ordered a Thanksgiving meal from some restaurant that was doing this thing, and you drive up and you pick it up, and you know, and we had got a suite at a hotel downtown, and so we had our little Thanksgiving meal there.
Okay.
And so I dropped down on one knee.
So there you are in the hotel room.
Yeah.
Your Thanksgiving meal, and now you're gonna do it.
I go down on one knee, and she's looking at me like, "What's the matter with this guy? Is he stretching his hip that's hurting?" Or and so I just told her she had to go to Florida for about 3 weeks, and in that 3 weeks I was alone in Santa Fe, and I just said to myself, I don't ever want to be without this woman again. And so that's when I decided to ask her to marry me. And so there I am, and I told her, this time when you were gone, I realized I don't ever want to be away from you. I love you more than anything, and will you do me the honor of being my wife? And then I pulled out the ring, and she didn't say anything. And I went to go put it on her finger, man, but my hand was like, and I almost told her, like, stop moving your hand. But it wasn't her hand that was moving, it was me. And I had it about right there to put it on. And then I said, wait, you didn't answer me.
Yeah, you have to say yes or no right now.
And she said, of course, yes, of course. And man, I was shaking like a leaf. Boy, I was never so nervous about anything in my life.
Yeah.
And I played in college basketball games where everyone's booing you and racially slurring you and throwing stuff at you, and you're at the free throw line and none of stuff like that didn't ever faze me.
Yeah.
But boy, I was nervous. I was shaking. I finally got it on, and then I just, a lot of why so much goodness has come into my life is because I just held myself accountable for losing faith in God, the one that saved me. I got to a point one day, I said, how could you be mad at God, man? He saved you from death 3 times. He got you off 3 deathbeds, man. You ain't mad at God, you're mad at yourself. Own it. You're the one that's not making it happen. And when I got to that point, I just said, God, no matter what happens, no matter how bad things get, I'm never going to lose my faith in you. Ever again. I'm going to put it in your hands. My life is in your hands. You do with it what you will. You use me as one of your tools in your toolbox. And over, he's done that. And when I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, a lot of things started changing for me. A lot of things. And a lot of opportunities started presenting themselves. And
I think what you mean by that, and I'm sorry, I just want to clarify, because you've always believed in God. But when you say when you really accepted Him, when you really embrace that, I think you've done that a few points in your life, but I think that what you're talking about right now is your rock bottom there in jail. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was, people talk about hitting rock bottom. I don't. I talk about the bottom of the rock. That's how low I was. The rock was on top of me.
Mm-hmm. And that's when you really made a decision.
That's when I said, I didn't get no lower than this.
Re-embrace your faith. Except
6 feet.
Yeah.
It could get 6 feet lower, but you're done at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to figure out how to get from underneath the rock first before rock bottom actually became rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're that low and you look up, all you see is the blue sky. All you see is something good, and that's what you have to work towards. And kind of like in Colorado when they quit on me, I had to walk through the flames to get to the good place, which was in Arizona, where the doctors don't think they're the miracle. They know that God's using them to create the miracle.
Right, because the doctors even prayed, isn't that correct, before they did the second transplant?
There's crosses in all the rooms. There's things about God everywhere, Jesus, about the sisters that the Sisters of Mercy that started the hospital. It's everywhere, and yeah, they do pray, and it was like I said, you have to walk through the fires or the storm or however you want to look at it to get to that good place. And I was definitely in the middle of the fire getting burned up, but I'm now in the good place. And the only way I got there is just through giving my life to Jesus and trusting God and letting the Holy Spirit work how the Holy Spirit works. When I got to the point where I just decided to let God be God and let God do what God does, that's when everything changed. And for a lot of my life, maybe I felt like I knew God was there, but maybe I didn't feel worthy. I didn't feel like I was good enough for, I don't know, we do this stuff to ourselves all the time. Self-sabotage, we have these negative self-perceptions and negative self-talk, and then we move negatively. And then we wonder why we're in a bad place. But when I stopped with that and started believing beyond measure, kind of like when I was sick the second time, like nobody gave me a chance. Nobody did. I was the only one that believed I was going to make it. But the thing is, even if you're the only one that believes it, you're the only one that matters. And if you believe it good enough and strong enough, nobody can chase you off of that. And you should never let anyone chase you off of that anyways. If that's what you truly believe and that's your goal or your dream or your belief, don't ever let anybody chase you off of that. Because accomplishing anything in life, believing that you can do it, you won more than half the battle. If you can do that, you won more than half the battle right there. Because the actual physical act of it, that's just the body following orders, man. The body being obedient. That can't be the biggest part of the battle. And so, when I did that, things started happening. People wanting to hire me. People wanted me to work for them.
Things falling.
People wanted to give me projects.
Yeah, falling into place.
And then I landed a job at the National Cemetery. And the local newspaper did a story on me for Memorial Day about the stonemason working at the National Cemetery on the new edition doing stonework after 2 lung transplants. And that kind of kicked things in a different direction to where I saw it like people were paying attention and people were being inspired by this story of the unheard of. Because it is unheard of. No one's ever done it. Ever.
Yeah.
Not the history of the world, the history of stonework, or transplants.
Yeah. Two lung transplants and back.
Then after that, I was on a national radio show with a friend of mine, Roxanne Watson. And I was telling her my story. And she says, "Have you written a book?" And I said, "No, I haven't. I've had some people tell me that I should, but I haven't." And she said, "Write the book, Mark." And to understand the gravity of those words, you have to understand Roxanne. She's a legend in the transplant world. She relentlessly works to sign people up to be organ donors. She's had a heart transplant herself. She's been through the battles. She knows what it's like to live the warrior life. And when those words hit my ears, they hit my ears in a way that those words had never hit my ears like that before from anybody else. And so I decided to start writing the book. And
moving forward from here, Mark, have you completed the book?
I've completed it. It's in the process of being turned to manuscript form. Some of it's already been sent to the publisher, and as we get more, it'll start being sent over.
Okay.
So within the next couple of months, it should be out.
Okay. You've also been dipping your toes into inspirational speaking.
Yes.
Yeah. So what do you see for your future moving forward? What do you see for yourself?
Well, I am a realist, and I realize that Father Time is undefeated for a reason. Nobody makes comebacks in stonework in their 50s, especially somebody with all the challenges that I face. I've been able to do that, but Father Time is nipping at my heels really strong. And so I'm using the end of this career to plant the seeds for my new career. And once the book comes out, then I will have a platform to work off of. And so now I'm kind of just getting the education that I need for a new career. I mean, nobody wakes up and says, "I feel like being a doctor today." Mm-hmm. That takes years of education. Mm-hmm. And I realize that there's some education that I need in order to do this on the level that I see myself doing it on.
To do what?
To inspire people, to help people get unstuck. I know there's a lot of people out there that I'll be able to help with medical problems. But there's a bigger audience out there that I want to help because they may be stuck on something that they never should have been stuck on in the first place. Mm-hmm. And I want to force them to look in their mirror and say, I just heard a guy speak who is doing stonework after 2 double lung transplants. What is your excuse today? Mm-hmm. And I even have that guy. Mm-hmm. I saw a guy speak it, and his name is Nick Vujicic. The man has no legs and no arms. And when he's presenting, he walks the stage side to side. And then I saw a video of him swimming in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And I immediately got in my mirror and I said, what's your excuse today, Mark? Nick is walking, has no legs. Nick is swimming, he has no arms. What is your excuse today? And I really feel like everybody should have that person in their life to check themselves against. So they don't use what I refer to as the tools of the weak.
Yeah.
Which are making excuses, blaming others, feeling sorry for yourself, and quitting.
You're talking about being a life coach.
If I can be that for somebody, and help somebody out of their dark places, whether it be medical or financial or even substances, alcoholism, anything. I've seen a lot of dark places and I've gotten out of a lot of dark places. And if I can help somebody else do that, then that's why God has me here. To be a humble, hardworking, helpful servant. And I realize that now. That is my purpose. And my life changed when I was able to find my purpose and find my reason for being here. And I know that God didn't put me in this position of 1 in 8 billion. I mean, if you look at the whole history of it, it's even more than that. Currently, it's a 1 in 8 billion position because I'm the only one in the world doing it. But I know he didn't give me this just so I could do more jobs and then limp off into the sunset, because that's what it'll look like. Mm-hmm. He put me in this position to show people what's possible and to show everybody that we all have a version of the unheard of and that we can all tell it loud and clear. But it starts with believing in yourself beyond measure when no one else does and you're the only one. That's what matters the most. And eliminating what I've referred to a couple of different times as operating in self-sabotage and feeding our fears and doubts to the point where they become monsters. And I speak in terms of a stonemason. And so sometimes as humans, we build these walls around ourselves, and the bricks are made, or the stones are made of fear and doubt. And then when we're trapped in and we're walled in and we're like, how did this happen? How did I get here? You're the one that built it. So you better figure it out. Either you bust through that thing, you jump over it, you tunnel under it, but you better figure it out because you made this thing. You gave your fears and doubts this power to become controlling over you. And so what I've come to learn and utilize in my everyday is to just starve my fears and doubts. I don't give them nothing. They don't get a scrap, they don't get a crumb, they don't get a whiff, they don't get a sniff. If I'm talking about what I'm cooking, they don't even get to listen. They get to die because that's what they want from me. First they'll start with my dreams and then they'll move on to me. And if you give them power, they become this monster. And you can't run from that monster. Because when that monster's chasing you, all it's doing is getting in better shape and getting stronger. Just like an athlete in training. So you're not outrunning this thing. You're helping it get stronger and bigger. So, you have to turn and dig your toes in the ground and say, come on, I'm not afraid of you anymore. You have no power over me anymore. If you want to get it, let's get it. If you want to fight, let's do it. And that's what warriors do. They fight. They never quit. Because if a warrior quits, then that's the moment that they stop being a warrior and they become the quitter or the coward. And sometimes in life, if you're going to wait around for things to not be hard, to not be difficult, for life not to suck, for there not to be pain or there not to be adversity, if you're going to wait for all those things to stop, you'll die waiting. You have to find your peace and your joy and your happiness amidst all of this craziness that happens every day.
Yeah.
On this big spinning rock that we live on.
Mark, we are out of time. Thank you so much for giving your story. It is incredible and inspirational, and we'll keep some tabs on how you're doing, and best of luck to you. But again, thanks for sharing.
I just want to thank you for all of you guys for the opportunity to do this, and the fact that you were gracious enough with your time and willing to take part in this project. It means the world to me.
Yeah, well,
I'll never forget you.
Yeah, no, well, we won't forget you either. You've got a great story, and I'm anxious to share it. So, thanks again. All right. I think we're about all out of batteries and all out of memory.
We're all out of batteries, all out of memory, all out of everything.
We took that as far as we possibly could go.
Hello.
Hi, is this John?
Okay. You're on my cell phone. Let me.
How about?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay, is that any better? Am I talking to John Stella?
Yes, you are.
Hi, how are you? This is Eli. We've talked once before. I don't know if you remember.
Yes, it was back in August.
Yeah, back in August. You know, again, I'm doing a little bit of I guess helping Mark tell the story of his life, because he's had a real wild ride. Well, I'm very glad you're bringing that up, because I was going to ask you about her and about what your daughter was like.
Oh, very compassionate. Very, very compassionate. Very, very caring. Always going out of her way to make people happy. She was able to help at least 6 people that saved their lives, and Mark was one of those 6.
Wow.
And she and we never knew that she had signed a donor's card. You know, that's the type of person she was. We met Mark at the airport in New York City. We had no idea who this person would be, except that we knew that he would probably have a surgical mask on, and in the middle of a very, very busy airport, we picked Mark up and we brought him to our home. this city, and we spent time with him there. And he had the opportunity to meet some of Michelle's families, Michelle's sister and cousins and other family members. And I know Mark was a stone mason, and I took a day with him, and we traveled to some of the historic places in Dutchess County that had a lot of stonework and that he was able to observe, and it was a great time. And we interact with Mark. When Mark has an opportunity to call us, or we see him on Facebook,